Action.
Welcome to Mrs. Benzi's class 4840 final project with Lydia Souls, John Tenney, McCree Martin, Christian Hibbs, and Janet Bailey. Starting us off will be Miss Lydia Souls talking about universal trials.
As we look at the speed that we are all moving, even if we're sitting completely still, it is very interesting if you look at the percentages that Earth orbit is only 1%, and that the actual speed is the local group of galaxies that we're in, and it is over 4 million miles an hour. Also, if you look at the comparison in size between all the tiny little man-made things in the center of this picture, the Hoover Dam, Eiffel Tower, the pyramids, the Great Arch, or the Arch in Missouri was there, and I can't even tell what the other ones are. But that's in comparison to Ayers Rock and Angel Falls. And all of them stacked together were shorter than the Mariana Trench.
Great job, Souls. All right, McCree, you're up next.
All right. This is the meaning of an asymptote. So the asymptote is the slant when a graph goes down. It never actually ends up meeting to its destination, but ends up getting really close to it. So instead of actually reaching zero at the bottom, it slowly starts gradually halving itself, getting closer and closer and closer to zero, but not actually ever actually getting there.
Great.
And then this is a so the number of times any amount can be divided, it can basically go on for an infinity because it can keep on getting smaller by decimals. So it's actually pretty cool because if you think about having something like that go on and on forever mathematically, it's weird. But it's like if you're walking to your car out in the parking lot, and as you keep on going, you're only taking half steps from what you last took, so you never actually end up making it to your car, but you're getting really, really close each time.
Well, great. Can you tell us how many times a number can be divided?
Never can be divided.
Infinite amount of times.
Half.
Thank you. All right. On my slide, I looked at theoretical and empirical probabilities based on dice rolls. And if you look at the chart with the dice rolls, we compared the rolling of two different dice with an even number and never divisible by 3, dice rolled to get a prime number, and dice rolled to get a product of 12. To calculate probability, you calculate by dividing the number of favorable outcomes by the total of possible outcomes. An empirical probability measures the amount of time something can occur. It can be calculated by taking the number of times the event happens divided by the total number of trials. And then I also did these bar graphs in Excel to explain the law of large numbers. If you look at the bar graph with the sum of 6, you can see how there's not a whole lot of information in there to fill up the bar graph. But as you continue to go with the amount of numbers, the more that the bar graph shows even distribution. And if you look at the sum with 6,000, you actually get almost like a bell-shaped curve out of the graph because the numbers make the information spread out more evenly. Souls, what can an honest chart show you?
Well, this honest chart shows you
this honest chart shows you that there isn't much difference between their scores as far as bowling went. But if you take the a chart and take the 0 away, it would look like very easily a comparison between Diana's score and Emily's score with Hildy in the middle, and it would be extremely biased against the two with a slightly lower score. And a dishonest chart is ones like these. The Katera is 4.5 according to the percentages, but the dot in the center of that map is 15% of the larger circle. Also, if we look at the arena funding, somebody didn't want to admit just how much the city had to put into that, because it was 65%, not 50%, like the pretend pie chart did show.
Great. Thank you, Souls.
Janet, what is the correlation between GMO crops and various diseases?
Well, if you look at these graphs here that I created in Excel, you can see that there's a correlation between the amount of GMO crops versus the various diseases that have spread throughout the year. If you look at this first graph here, you're looking at the rate of autism applied to crops of corn and soy with GMOs in them. And as you see, there's quite a trend in the relationship between the two. The more that the GMOs have increased, the more that autism has also increased. But if you look at what the FDA says, the FDA, I pulled this information directly off the FDA's website that asks, are food from GE plants safe to eat? The FDA is saying that yes, credible evidence says that they're safe to eat. They also deny that there's any effects on any diseases or long-term effects related to the GMOs. However, the statistics are proving them to be lying about it, so to speak. Lydia, what chances a male have a safe BMI?
The body mass index between 18.5 and 25 is considered safe. But if you put that against the population of men in the United States, you can see that it is well below the mean or average weight. And that not only that, but only 17% are covered by that healthy percentage.
Great.
And as you can see, age is a factor in that the 21-year-old who was with us in the room and weighed more than a 45-year-old was not much bigger as far as her body mass index goes. But then again, there are people like me who are in the top 15%. So we won't talk about my Z-score on the matter with two really little people involved. Tinny, what did you find in this binomial experiment chart that was interesting?
The binomial experiment that they did is another way of probability. There's 4 criteria for a binomial experiment. It has a fixed number of trials. Each trial is independent of the others. There are only 2 outcomes. It's such like flipping a coin is either heads or tails. The answer is yes or no or anything like that. And the probability of each outcome remains constant from trial to trial. And if you look here, the distribution formulas here are listed for us as we figure out these things. And this the last chart shows the variable identifications in the formulas. And one of them listed, B is a binomial probability, X is the number of successes, P is a probability of a success, Q is 1 minus P is a probability of getting a failure on any one trial, and N, of course, is the number of trials. The next slide we're saying just kind of goes back to that, and it's a percentage of winning the lottery, and it shows about ticket sales and about the percentage of a outcome for the buyer and a percentage of outcome for the seller. If you look down through here all the way down to $100,000, it shows that the seller would end up making $9,627,181.59, whereas the person that's doing the buying doesn't have nearly as good of a chance of that. Everything is stacked against someone trying to win the lottery or win any game of chance that they have. McCree, discuss the probability of being an obese American and being an obese American with type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure, please.
All right, Tania. I created these graphs to show how some Americans have like multiple health problems. It says there's 27.5 million Americans who have type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and obesity. And it's just such a high number for America right now. And then probability of being an obese American depending on population. So here in Arkansas, right now, for adults, there's a 35% chance of like being obese, when 1825 is 13.3, and it shows you got 26 to 44 is 40, 45 to 64 is 41, and then 65 and plus is 30. Right now, Arkansas is seventh amongst the 50 states. All right, and this one goes to Christian. Discuss the probability of impaired driving.
Impaired driving, well, as you can see, there's been some fatalities increasing due to texting. And then you see the gender, female versus male. Males are guilty of impaired driving almost double compared to females. We have a problem, and in 2018, there were 56 lives lost just per county. So comparing these impaired drivings, let's see. Yeah, I mean, that's really the comparison is the gender, but the males we have a lot harder time with the impaired driving compared to the females. Next slide. Then our next slide, this is about location. Oh, wait, where is this? Okay, so you can see the alcohol-related vehicle deaths comparing the different countries. The United States is up there. We're in second place right after Canada with alcohol-related deaths. So we are one of the worst countries with alcohol-impaired driving. Let's see. And then the next one is going to be John Tenney. This is Trump approval ratings.
These particular charts that I've compiled here shows the Trump's approval ratings from Republicans, from independents, and from Democrats. And it shows that if you're a Republican, you pretty much have a pretty high approval number for President Trump, and which is 87%, with 12% of Republicans disapproving of President Trump. If you're an independent, you're a little more middle of the road. You have 34% that approve, 63% disapprove, and then the Democrats are the ones that really don't approve of President Trump. They only have an 8% approval rating of what he's doing, and the rest of them, 90%, 90+%, don't approve of anything he does. This next chart we're talking about here is the percentage of women and men that would be in different branches of the government. We had to come up with these formulas here that showed, what percentage it was of women that were in the Army, women that were in the Navy, women that were in the Marines or in the Air Force. And down on the bottom, it shows how that there are certain women that are not in the Air Force, Marines, or Navy. So in other words, women, there would be only that many women that would be in the Army was about 33%. Same thing with a man. He was about 37%. It showed that most women are not Marines, about 93.28%. And then of all the Americans, only about 2% of all Americans are members of the military of any branch. This one goes to Miss Bailey. What is the difference in standard deviation comparing the height in Army recruits compared to the height of random mall walkers?
Well, thanks, Tinny. If you look at the standard deviation of the height of Army recruiters, it looks like their standard deviation is about 4.03, comparing it to the random mall walkers whose standard deviation is 14.07. Now, when I made these charts in Excel, you can see that there is a huge variation in the standard deviation compared to the two. If you look at the standard deviation of the Army recruits, their data is very similar compared to the random mall walkers. So that is why their charts are so different. If you look over at this second slide that I made using the information that I created in Excel, you'll see that the trend on the scatter plot is a lot smoother on the Army recruits compared to the height of the random mall walkers. And that's because if you look at the data that was gathered during these tests, the height of the Army recruit, their variation is much less compared to the variation of the random mall walkers. If you look at the plot in whisker, if you look at the whisker plots, the height of the Army recruits is much longer, and that is because the information is not as varied. Again, same thing with the random mall walkers. The standard deviation is higher, so with that, it makes the scatter plot and the whisker plot kind of all over the place. Hibbs, can you discuss the trend line and the coefficient of variation for texting and driving?
Yes, so throughout the semester, we've been learning how to find the standard deviation. We find the standard deviation by finding the mean and then dividing that. The coefficient of variation is the different variations of the standard deviation. So what we did with this trend line is in the middle, we have our mean. And then we found, we just plugged in the same formula we used to find the coefficient of variation. And we did +1, +2, +3, +4. But then we also did -1, -2, -3, -4. And that gave us the variation of the coefficient on this trend line. The different age groups, as you can see, we have 16 through 24-year-olds, and then we have 25 through 69-year-olds, and then we have 70-plus years. And then we also have the years going down. You can see over the years there's been an increase in young texting and driving. So texting and driving is more of a problem for the 16 through 24 age group than it is the 25 to 59 age group. And that has been a problem that's just been increasing as the years go on. John T., the next one, this is how is the wealth distributed in the United States?
Well, the wealth in the United States is distributed very unequally, with only 1% of households owning 35% of all the wealth in the United States. You can look by these charts and graphs that I've created in Excel with the information here on the left is what we made the graphs from, and it shows how that if you look at the blue here that shows that there's 35% of the people own just, 35% of the, or 1% of the people own 35% of the wealth, and it just kind of shows by those bar and graph charts. Another thing, if you look at this lower graph, it's something we got off the internet. It's kind of a skewed graph because you would think, looking at it, that the most money would be the highest bars, but actually the most money is on the very lowest, the top 5% over here to your right, and the regular average Joe is kind of in the middle. So it's kind of misleading when you look at that graph. You're going, oh man, everybody's doing well. Well, if you look in the middle, the median income is only 49,000, whereas on the right-hand side is 200,000 plus, or 190,000 plus. The next slide that I have as part of this assignment is what are the pitfalls of starting a business. I wasn't able to get all the numbers in here, but Mr. Musk started a flamethrower business back a few years back. And when he started the flamethrower business, he had to put a certain amount of money to get it started, the startup money. Well, if you look at the way this chart goes, you'll see that he lost money all the way down to about 100 fire extinguishers. And that's kind of where he started to break even. And then he started going back up, and he had to sell 220 fire extinguishers to actually start making a profit on his money. And then he went on and made millions of dollars. I think he made over $5 million over selling these fire extinguishers he had. There was a kind of a real neat little fire extinguisher that he had going. But I was in business for myself for quite some time, and it is tough to be in business. And one of the things Mr. Musk said was you have to be able to offer a product that nobody else has and take care of your customers better than anything. And when on our first Excel report, I put on there that was spot on, because that's exactly the way it was when I was in business. Mr. Hibbs, where are America's tax dollars spent, and what are your personal thoughts upon it?
Well, you can see that our federal tax dollars, if we can zoom in on the presentation, but mainly education is very low. Education is only 12% with our federal tax dollars, whereas we use a lot of our federal tax dollars for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security mainly, and benefits for veterans and federal retirees. Well, my thoughts are it's quite different where our federal tax dollars go compared to our state tax dollars. Our state tax dollars, a lot more of our state tax dollars go towards education. About 25% of state tax dollars go towards education, whereas with federal, we do not spend that much on education on the federal level. So where our state spends our money is they do have different priorities compared to our federal government. And then discuss the inequality of wealth in America. Well, you can see that a majority of the wealth in America is owned by a tiny population. And the bottom 20%, 20, 40, yeah, the bottom half of our entire country owns less than maybe 10% of our entire country's wealth. And a lot of our wealth is captive with that top 1% and 5%. Okay, John Finney, how different ways of filing our taxes makes it different in the amount we owe?
These next two slides will show that depending on how you file your taxes is how the amount of money that you, and depending on how you list yourself, whether you're head of household, whether you're married filing jointly, or whether you're single. I think the question this particular assignment asked was, how much money would you have if you got a $2,000 raise here? And we're showing you got a $50,000 with your old pay, $52,000 is your new pay. And with the new pay, you go into a different tax bracket, and of course your taxes go up. If you look on the old pay as a head of household, your tax bracket was 18.9%. When you go into the new pay, it's 28.9%. So it's really, really makes it difficult to finish it all out. The other chart here shows that, and if you click down to the next slide right quick, now I'll talk about one of the other ones. The last one talks about, if you're single, and it shows that the tax burden a single person has, because they start out paying 28.9% on either one. They don't really change brackets, but it shows how much money they have to pay in taxes off of their money, and it's really kind of disconcerting on all the way that they have to pay the taxes. Go ahead to the next one. That's right. So we should be up to McCree now. So you want me to ask him?
Yeah.
All right, you ready? McCree, discuss the linear growth pattern of the simple interest line, please.
All right. The simple interest is when the interest is paid for the set amount, while compound interest is the fee paid plus a premium of that interest adds up over time. So your simple only goes up like on this chart, it goes up $216. It keeps on going up $216 as it goes down, while the quarterly compound goes up a little bit more than 216. It starts adding up. It starts adding an extra dollar or two as it starts going up, and adding extra interest as you go along. And in this next graph, it actually shows how the exponential pattern and the compound interest graphs. So this shows you the interest rates and how they exponentially over time grow, and especially when they are not kept with paid. So like if you don't keep up and pay your interest rates, or if you don't keep ahead of them, that they're going to keep on building up, and you're going to end up paying more and more and more than you actually than your simple rates. This one goes the Tinny, how interest of loans are affected the payoff on loans.
This is a whole lot like what McCree was talking about. It shows how that if you have a loan, you borrow $3,600, and you invest this. I think he was investing $3,600, and if you work with continuous compound interest on it every day, every minute of the day, that thing it's making you money in interest. So you can see the difference that you gain by the continuous compound interest is $6,500 versus $5,700. So it's almost $800 difference you made by the compound interest. The chart over here shows how the lines go of, the simple interest is not that much. The quarterly compound is more, and then the continuous compound, of course, is the most. This graph right here shows how much paying extra does make a difference in a 20-year mortgage. It shows that, just what you would pay if you paid the regular payment there. You would pay it'd take you 239 months to pay. You would pay a total of $174,000, and you'd pay $64,000 of interest. If you only paid $50 a month extra on top of your monthly payment of $730, which would make it $780, don't go out, eat as much, don't do that type of things. You pay off your loan almost 2 years earlier. You would pay a whole lot less money, about $8,000 less, and you would pay almost $8,000 less in interest. If you actually go ahead and jack it up to $100 a month, you're going to pay $830 a month for the same loan repayment. You're only going to have 194 months that you're going to have to pay it off, and you're going to have almost another $6,000 that you're going to save on interest in it. So it's quite a sizable amount, about $14,000-$15,000 you would save over 20 years on paying off just $100 more a month. Christian, discuss the different costs of living in these chosen states, and why does making more in one city not necessarily mean that you end up with more altogether?
Okay, well, for my 3 cities, I tried to choose 3 cities that were far apart. So I chose Asheville, North Carolina. Then I chose Chicago, Illinois, and then Seattle, Washington. Do I need this in?
No, he took it out.
Here you go.
So my 3 cities, Asheville, North Carolina, that's the most rural one. The career I chose was plumber. Well, plumbers make the least amount of money in Asheville, North Carolina. Well, the cost of living is also the cheapest in Asheville, North Carolina. So although they had the lowest salary, that doesn't necessarily mean that you make less saving, because your yearly expenses are a lot cheaper. The next slide. The next slide is the other extreme. It's Seattle. In Seattle, plumbers make quite a bit of money. If the internet is true, 84,740. And then, like I was saying, the yearly expenses in Seattle are also a lot more expensive. So in a place like Chicago or Seattle, you may be making more money, but you're also spending more money to live there. So it really balances out. The most expensive place was Seattle. Chicago was surprisingly cheaper than Seattle. You just spent more, and you actually saved money in Chicago because of all the public transportation.
This concludes our final project for quantitative literacy 4842, spring 2019. Thanks for watching.
As Miss Benji would say, we rock!